Hello everyone and welcome to Flight Club. My name is Klaus Leopold and I'm the co-host of this wonderful show here. And the second host is Cliff Hazell.
Good evening everyone and welcome to Flight Club. Very excited to have you with us this evening. We have a very special guest with us this evening by the name of Esther Derby, and we will be introducing her very shortly. She's actually right now taking delivery of a chair. So she will be back in a few seconds, so I need to fill the gap until she is returning. So this is a new and novel thing for us to deal with in Flight Club. It's the live show. Cool. Esther, you are back. I could not see this. Hello and welcome to Flight Club, Esther. It's really wonderful to have you here. Do you want to say how's it to everybody? We have folks joining from all over the world. Yeah. Very cool to have you. Welcome tonight, Esther.
I'm super glad you've all shown up for this conversation. And I'm glad my chair arrived too. And I caught the delivery guy in time to have him help me bring it up the stairs. Otherwise, it was going to be sitting in the snow until tomorrow.
Perfect.
It's nice. Cool. So greetings to everyone on the live stream. I see we have folks Santiago de Chile, Cape Town, Munich. Where do we have? Hamburg, Hanover. And then is this Koblenz? Where is this? I actually do not know where this is.
In Germany.
In Germany. I learn something new every day. And Düsseldorf as well. Fantastic. It's really, really lovely to have you all joining us this evening. Yes. So a couple of things before we get started with the Flight Club. A couple of things. So for those of you who are enjoying the session, if at any point you feel particularly excited about the content we're talking about, if you like it a little bit, hit the like button. If you like it a lot, hit the subscribe, and you will get notifications about future events. The like button really helps us, gives us kind of a little bit more publicity on YouTube, and other people tells us basically that you're enjoying the content, and the YouTube algorithm does all sorts of cool magic as a result of it. So would really appreciate if you could do this. Cool. Yes. What else was I going to say? I had something else that I was going to tell you before this. No. So the topic for today, we are talking with Esther. And as some of you may know, and hopefully many of you have had the privilege, is to read her latest book. The book is called 7 Rules for Change. And it explores a number of very, very interesting topics. So we're going to spend a little bit of time today unpacking those a little bit, talk about some of the concepts of how does the C model map to flight levels, and just generally whatever we find interesting. Of course, as always, please ask questions on the live stream. It's way more interesting if we get to discuss and engage with questions that you are bringing up. So please fire away in the live stream at any point. I will remind you a couple of times during the stream as we go. But yes, Esther, I wonder if maybe you can tell us, there's a question that I had kind of in my mind, is something that we've talked about in a number of contexts before, is very often inside an organization, we see somehow the goal of the organization is basically as a kind of a production system. Our goal is to try to get the most out of everybody and out of everything, and it's very like squeeze it out of everybody. For me, it's a little bit of a strange thing. And in a lot of our conversations and in your books and contexts, you talk about it much more as collaborative knowledge work. It's much more about humans and systems, this kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. Tell us a little bit about what is your take on this? What are the important factors, just to kind of open up with a light and easy topic?
Oh, well, you chose one that's neither light nor easy. Because if you look, the whole history we have, our whole legacy of trying to squeeze what we can out of people, it really comes from a very dark place. And actually the origins of most of our modern counting systems can find their antecedents, and some of our management practices in their family tree have enslaved labor. So not exactly a light topic to think about how we have this notion of squeezing as much as we can out of people.
Yeah. So I really like the thing of trying to sort of think about this in a different way. Is like what we're trying to do is sort of the metaphor that I've often used is gardening. You create kind of the right conditions. I kind of joke and say, well, you can't shout at your plants and expect them to grow. Some people say, well, you should talk to your plants, and maybe this is helping. I think maybe if I talk to my plants, it's helping me more than the plants. And if it's therapeutic, yeah, cool. But at the end of the day, this metaphor of trying to create the right conditions, the right environment, you plant in the right season, make sure you get enough sunlight, enough water, but not too much, more sort of balance and kind of working with the environment and the ingredients that you have available. Can you, just expand a little bit? What's your take on this?
Well, I think even more so than gardening, the metaphor of forest succession is appropriate when we think about bringing change into our organizations. As most people that garden, it's like, they dig up the sod and then they put in some seeds and things work out okay. But if you're thinking about forest and you have rocky ground, dry rocky ground, you cannot just plant beautiful oak trees or pine trees, whatever kind of trees, and have them survive, because the soil will not support them. So forest succession, you go from starting out with, dry rocky ground, and then a few scrub plants, short ones generally take hold. And because their roots go into the ground, they change the aeration of the ground a little bit, and they may hold just a tiny bit of moisture, just a tiny bit of shade, and that enables the next plant community to begin to thrive. And then you can get plants that require a little moisture and more moisture, and they grow a little taller and they create more shade, which means yet another plant community can come in. And eventually you get to a place where you can have a mature forest, but you cannot go from rocky ground to forest. Doesn't happen, right? There's a whole lot of things that have to happen in changing the environment in order for that forest to emerge. So I think that's a really important metaphor for change. Yeah. It's not as simple as just planting the seeds and watering them. You have to create the conditions.
I get so sad. So often we work with organizations, and the sort of the prevailing metaphors for change and the models of it is somehow like, there's so many problems, but not even getting to gardening, or ideally even, as you say, towards forest succession, but much more mechanistic. It's sort of an installed change. It's designed up front, very rarely involves the people, these kind of things. And for me, this it's not just disappointing in terms of sort of a philosophical and ethical perspective. It's also just worse in terms of, I think, the most objective performance measurements and kind of getting a sense of what's actually effective and so on. Yeah.
So if you think about the installing metaphor, this metaphor frames in our head. So it's not just the word installing that comes up when people hear that. It comes with the idea that there is a part that you are putting into something, right? And most of the time parts involve machine, unless it's a pacemaker. So you're putting a part into a machine, and once that part is installed, that machine will behave in a different way, or it will be repaired, or whatever it is. But the interesting thing to pay attention to is that there's only one animate there, and that's the person who's putting the part in. The machine that is receiving the part is not animate. So you don't expect any kind of emotional response. You don't expect any kind of cognitive response. You just expect to put it in, turn it on, and it will be different. So I think those metaphors really get in the way of making change.
Yeah, so it's like a mechanistic point of view of the entire company. And if there's something broken, you bring in a mechanic and he's or she's fixing it, and then everything is running again. What I find somehow, not fascinating, that's not the right word for it, but especially when we are talking about agility. So somehow making a company agile, and the first thing that pops up in our mind is this mechanistic point of view. We do a big design up front, so we plan our change in the next 3 years. These are the milestones, and then we are finally agile. We are there. So this doesn't make any sense to me, actually. So I mean, practice what you preach.
I think the gap between what people are saying, we want you to be agile, but we are going to do this change in a very unagile way. And anytime there's that kind of gap, that kind of cognitive dissonance between what we're being asked to do and what people are saying is desired, that gap fills in with cynicism and fear.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, we make you agile. That's the other thing. So it doesn't have something to do with us. So, I mean, we are like, I mean, that's what I see quite often. So we are management. We are on board because we allow you to become agile, but we don't change anything what we do. So that's also a pattern, what I see quite often. So talking about patterns.
Well, so that comes from the traditional separation of head and hands. The managers are the ones who think, and the other people in the organization just are the hands that are going to accomplish the work and do as they're told. So that is, I mean, I don't think most people consciously think that, but I think it is really, it's in a family tree of management. So whether people consciously think that or not, when they step into that system, some of those assumptions come with them. And managers are taught that they're supposed to have all the answers. They're supposed to be able to tell people what to do. They're supposed to, so it's all tied up in that kind of thing. But ironically, I think when you move towards agile and teams are not, the managers are no longer doing day-to-day supervision with their teams, I think there's a far more strategic role for managers. I think that's the irony, is that it would be far more strategic to run the system, to develop people and work on the system, rather than just do a day-to-day task.
Yeah, absolutely. Klaus, will you say something?
You go ahead. I will save this for later.
So I was thinking about this because I think one of the things that is kind of challenging for a lot of people in this sort of a journey towards being more agile or something, if you will. I dislike using the word transformation because it carries a lot of strange baggage that I don't like. But one of the things that I think is sometimes a little bit tricky is that we have this sort of, I think it's a sort of a false sense of certainty when we're doing something in a sort of a more waterfall kind of way. Maybe we think that if we can spend all our time up front, we can define all the answers and remove all of the risk and so on. And one of the things that we talk about in doing things, not only sort of in a more effective way from a change perspective, but also from an agile and sort of an outcomes perspective, is to try to do things in smaller parts instead of in these big bangs. And there was a really cool question. We were actually having a conversation inside the community over the last couple of days in preparation, and Siggy was asking a couple of questions about this, which I'm going to draw on in a minute. But I think this idea of trying to get smaller is somehow quite challenging, because for a lot of people that means that we kind of somehow start out before we know exactly what the end state is, and that I think weirds a lot of people out, because then we don't know where we're going and we don't know where we might end up or something. Have you seen something like this?
Well, I mean, I think people have been taught to believe that certainty is possible and desirable. And there are projects where you can know all the requirements up front. They're few and far between. Many of them have been done long ago, right? Where you're auditing an existing process. Or computerize an existing process, then you can actually know all the requirements up front. I mean, the first computer software project I was aware of was when I was about 9 years old, and the state of Pennsylvania was automating some of their administrative processes. And my father brought me home a little IBM flowcharting template, and I started drawing flowcharts. But so that sort of that sort of thing, you can actually know all of the requirements up front. That's not the kind of problem we're solving now, but the mindset that if we design it up front, everything will be well is still with us. And I don't know to what extent that is due to the fact that the people who shaped many of our, processes around software grew up in that era and didn't update their mental model. But,
I wonder if part of this is, sorry, carry on.
Go ahead.
I was wondering if part of this is sort of a thing of somewhere in the, I don't know if it was in the early days of Agile or somewhere where things got a little bit wonky, but somehow people got the idea that waterfall means planning everything into the nth degree, and Agile somehow means no planning. And for me, this is sort of a weird thing, because what I find more effective approach is that it's not so much about how much we planned or if we even planned. It's, it probably makes sense to have plans if you're going to do something big and complicated, because you should at least have some kind of rational explanation for how you're going to get where you're going. But it's more about how often you update and iterate on that plan. And so, yeah, if you somehow think that the plan is fixed and it's perfect, you probably won't spend so much time kind of looking around for evidence that shows you maybe you should learn something or tweak something or something like this. Maybe that's part of the underlying challenge here.
I have seen, not recently, but I have seen project plans that had tasks that were 2 years in the future broken down to like 4-hour increments, and that's just fiction.
Oh, wow.
It's just fiction, right?
Yeah.
But we have been taught that predictability is the goal, and that efficiency requires that we have everything estimated, and when we just follow the plan. But it makes for things that are very brittle, because the moment anything goes wrong, your plan is completely blown up.
I mean, that's somehow a recurring pattern that I observe even here in this show. So we had a conversation with Troy McGinnis and with Julia Wester. So it was a totally different topic. So today we are talking a lot about human beings, and then we were talking about like mathematical stuff, like when will it be done, to answer this question. And even here, so it's always uncertainty somehow included into it. And we, at least that's my take on it, we always think that we can eliminate these uncertainties somehow by writing down a plan or whatever, although it would make much more sense to somehow, acknowledge that there is uncertainty and, plan with this in mind. And especially when it comes to agile transformation, because I think that's the heart or one of the core parts of agility. We don't know everything in advance what we are doing. We don't know how customers are reacting. We don't know how people are reacting. So it's strange.
And we have a shallow understanding of agile. I mean, I
that's a good
talked to a company that sent everybody to a 2-day class on, I don't remember what it was, probably Scrum, but everybody went to a 2-day class, and then they said, this is now our process, and any changes to the process must be approved by the software engineering process group. So they codified everything when they knew the least about it, which is another trap. And I think we in our personal lives, we get this, right? If you have kids, that planning things exactly is futile, right? You know when they have to, be on the bus to go to school, but other than that, just have to deal with the uncertainty that's going to happen when you have, random stuff happening with kids. I mean, we know in our personal life. When I was working full time and in grad school, I had parts of my life planned out in half-hour increments. Right, I would spend this much time on statistics. I would spend this much time on, blah blah blah, and in theory it looked really great. And then I was rear-ended in driving to work, and I ended up in traction, and my plan went to hell. There was no way to recover because there was no slack. So we get that. We get it as humans in our real lives. And then we get into the system at work and we take on a lot of the assumptions of the system, which highly mechanistic. And we do these things that, you know.
So, yeah. There was a question from Siggy in the community discussion earlier, and he was saying one of the things with small experiments, he's curious, how do we avoid the risk of solving only the symptoms? Because the risk is maybe that if we focus only on the small stuff, we'll end up picking just like kind of tiny stuff rather than figuring out how to, tackle the big things. So how do we avoid this risk?
Well, I think how you tackle the big things is going after the little things. I mean, like the example I use a lot is you cannot drop 2 weeks off lead time. You can't. You have to look at all of the things that contribute to it and then work on those. You can't just arbitrarily lock 2 weeks or 2 months off time to market. You have to look at what is making time to market take so long and then start working on those little factors. So I think that if you are concerned about not working on the big problem, it's because you might be sort of randomly trying things. And, that sometimes can work, but I think being conscious and having a real rationale about this is the pattern we see, and based on our observation and analysis, these are the things that contribute to the pattern. So let's work on those factors.
Yeah,
I think if you do experiments that way, then you are actually working on the problem.
And I think this actually goes to the core what we somehow think when it comes to flight levels. So flight levels is exactly about this. So it's not like a framework that you are somehow installing in your organization. The very first thing is the question, what do we want to change? So what do we want to see? How does the needle need to change? And then we try to figure out how to get there. And for me, it's always like I'm totally puzzled when someone says, okay, we are doing framework X, and this means we are doing all these transformations and we're doing all this stuff, and then everything will be fine. And I'm like, sure, but is this the problem? I mean, what's the problem you're solving? Yeah, we want to become agile. Okay, cool. But what is agile?
Not a problem.
Yeah. And what is agile? I mean, it's a balloon of full of hot air, and everybody can somehow project something into it. And yeah, I don't know. I don't get this point. Like, let's just change something and then see what happens.
Well, I do get it. I do get why people do that, because managers are highly rewarded for taking decisive action. Right. So that is what people are looking to them for. That's what their managers are looking for. They're looking for decisive action. And Agile is one of the popular ones these days, but reorgs are a tried and true way to take decisive action. There's something wrong. You take this action. It will screw up a bunch of stuff and depress productivity, but it's decisive.
Yeah, and you see something that something is happening if you shuffle the org chart around. People are sitting in other offices. They are no longer called teams, but squads and tribes, and yay! So there's a lot going on.
You said you had Troy on your last thing, and he had some really interesting data at one point about a company that was doing periodic reorgs. I mean, it's like clockwork. Well, we're going to shake things up. Their productivity would go.
Yeah.
And it corresponded
Yeah.
Decisive.
I want to take from F. Biesdorf, repeat view, actually, nice to have you back, is asking a question. Says, in my organization, basically the way this works is that the project is specified, everything is kind of clarified up front, and then if you want to make a change, you have to apply for a change request, and people get punished if this process is actually happening. The question he asks is, what gives? Yeah.
Well, Well, that is a model to control change scope creep that works in certain conditions, right? If you're building a building and keep making decisions about, oh no, we want the garage on the left side, not on the right side, and we do all this kind of stuff, there are real costs to that, right? So it's a mechanism to control that. And it is appropriate in situations where you can actually, have a plan. Although I think the housing metaphor is not actually real accurate either. But it makes no sense in a situation where you haven't learned everything you need to learn, and when you don't know everything you need to know, right?
Yeah. I find it fascinating because I think a lot of what we're doing in these sort of spaces, it's not so much that, I mean, there are obviously situations where we're doing things that are fundamentally broken at their core. A lot of what I see, though, is this thing where we're just taking something that actually works in a certain context and misapplying it in another. So we work in a domain as if it's all certain, but it's actually an uncertain domain. And then ironically, actually flip it around. We're building something that is predictable, and then we use such methods and try to iterate and don't plan anything in advance. And somehow we end up frustrating both sides of this equation, which seems a little bit odd. Yeah.
Well, it's a never-ending quest for the one solution, the one thing, rather than applying judgment and recognizing that there's variation here. We need to choose the method that will fit this particular context. And it goes back to the efficiency myth, right? If we standardize everything or shove everything into a standard, we'll be efficient, not effective. If the work is variable. But.
So there's a comment in the chat. Sorry, I think we've got a little bit of lag on the line there. Changing the topic slightly, actually. There's a comment in the chat from Leah L, referencing a little bit of what we were saying earlier. She says, we are management, we are on board, we allow you to become agile, but we don't change anything that we do. This is my life in a nutshell. And I think kind of where a lot of this comes from, and we've actually talked a lot about this, so I'm really curious to hear what your thinking on this is what do I do as a manager in an agile organization? I think we don't have so many answers, unfortunately, for people, and so it becomes about changing everybody else rather than understanding that I maybe could do something different. So what are your thoughts on this?
Well, I think there's a far more strategic role for managers. And that is developing people and working on the system, right? Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, in most traditional organizations, particularly middle managers, tend to be in competition with each other, which makes sense because they are competing for the scarce attention of their manager. They are competing for scarce promotions, and those opportunities get fewer and fewer as they go up in the chain. So it's an artifact of that structure that they're in conflict, right? They are rewarded for achieving the goal of their functional unit or their functional team. They are not typically rewarded for making the end-to-end process work. Yeah. So if you can refocus managers to work across the organization and begin to look at how can we make the system work better? How can we make this value stream work more effectively? How can we look at the barriers? If you can engage people and managers in those sorts of projects, that's super strategic and super valuable to the organization. And typically managers do have some institutional knowledge about how the organization works. So I think that's a very valuable role for managers, and then developing people. Yeah. So I think the whole early thing about we don't need no stinking managers help at all.
Yeah. And I think that's again one thing what we try to at least address when it comes to flight levels. So actually, I don't believe that the reorganization is changing everything. So you're basically, usually the silos start somewhere in the top management. You have the CXO silo, the CYO silo, the CZO silo, and the so-called management team is just a group of competitors. most of the time.
Yeah.
And yeah, so I think if as you said, we need to somehow make them collaborate, and that's actually the role of what we see on a flight level 2 system. So the idea of it is really like we want to get everybody on board from idea to impact of the entire value creation chain so that they can take decisions together. That's the whole point behind it. What's getting in the way most of the time is bonus systems. So I need to optimize my silo, my CYO silo, and I'm not so happy in collaborating, right? So yeah.
So sometimes when I work with organizations that are having problems like that, I talk to them about what I call the model, which talks about domains, and each domain has a set of interests, and they aren't hard lines, so this can bleed a little bit. But every organization has to be concerned with steering, which is what business are we in, what market are we in, how are we positioned in the market, how do we treat our customers, what's our value proposition.
Yeah.
And every organization has to be concerned about how do we enable people to do work. How do we enable the people who actually build products and deliver services do their work? And how do we enhance their ability to do that? And then they have the set of concerns that are around actually making products and delivering services. So I call it steering, enabling, enhancing, and making. And I find often that by having conversations around that model, people will focus more on the work that needs to be done versus my job and my position in the hierarchy. It doesn't, you don't have to get rid of the hierarchy. You don't have to disrupt it at all, right? Yeah. You just talk about the work differently and focus people on, these are the concerns that we have to really pay attention to versus this is the bonus we try to achieve.
Yeah.
One of the things that I found fascinating I was reading your book again, because I read one of the sort of the early copies of it, and thinking about those levels, you called it sort of. I don't know in so much detail because we haven't had sort of such long conversations about the specifics of this. Yeah. I was noticed that there seems to be some sort of a connection. What you were calling steering in Klaus terminology, we call strategy. We call enabling, enhancing. We've called it collaboration or coordination at least, but it's often focused in that sort of middle management kind of space. Yeah. And what you're making, we've corporations. And in reading your description of this model and this concept, I was just like, wow, like we're talking about a lot of the same things here. And I'm really interested to kind of explore this a little further and see, you talk about a bunch of different specific that is kind of, for me, helping a little bit to answer that question of, as a manager in this space, or if I fit in here, my role is a little bit different if I'm in a making or an enabling or a steering space. And there's maybe different things that I need to kind of think about. I don't want to say levers, but somehow the size or the shape of the lever, the tools that I can use, the different things that I can work with. For those who haven't read the book and able to experience some of that as yet, could you give a little bit more color to it and just sort of maybe an outline of what the model is and what your thinking behind it was?
So the C model or the book?
Maybe start with the book, and then the C model would be a great follow-up to that.
Okay, so I looking back on my career, I realized fairly early on that my job, even though my job description said writing code, that my job really involved change. And I recognized that the programs I was writing were actually changing the way people did their jobs on my first professional program. Because the guy who was supposed to use it hated it because it changed the way he did his job. He used to be, going around scratching estimates in the back of an envelope. Now he'd be sitting in front of a computer and on the phone. So I started paying attention to change a long time ago and have lived through a lot of organizational changes when I was a corporate employee and led and supported many changes since I went independent. So the book is about a different way to approach change that is more organic and more aware of complexity and more attentive to the humans. And it's not a process, it's a set of heuristics that say, you know, in any situation, look at these heuristics and see what will help you solve the problem that's in front of you. So it's really a set of heuristics. And the C model shows up in the heuristic that is about assess what is. Because people tend to think that change starts with a vision. It is good to know where you want to go, but change really starts with where you are right now. Because if you don't attend to the pattern that currently exists, and you lay something else on top of it, you just spread the Agile on top of whatever it is, or spread the methodology, whatever it is on top of it, the underlying pattern is going to reassert itself.
Yeah.
Always. So you have to really start with what is. And the C model is one of the models I use to help people think about that. And you can use it in a sort of diagnostic way, but I also use it in a dialogic way, in a way to help people have conversations that shift the way they think, that then shift the way they act, and that can help move people from a very mechanistic way of thinking about, this is my job, this little box, or to I need to take account of the people I'm working with and their skills and capabilities and how our jobs fit together to create something useful.
I really that thing of understanding where we're at and what the patterns are that are occurring right now, because I think so much of the change that we try to initiate in organizations is just at some level actually incoherent with what's actually happening. But we're viewing this from 10,000 miles away, going, those teams over there need to change, or that something has to be different. But when we actually, I like this metaphor from the lean world. They talk about this idea of going to Gemba. And it's something that I think has resonated with a lot of folks, of like, go and understand what's actually happening. And I interpret this a lot as, spend time with the people doing work and, on the ground. It's very hard to be helping folks to improve if you really have no context or understanding of what they're dealing with in their day to day. Yeah.
Yes, and I think you have to have viable models through which to interpret what you observe. Because I have certainly seen people go look at a team, and their model of how a team should act and behave is such that they look at a team that is, for example, a team that has a very good camaraderie and is working 40 hours a week, and they seem like they're having fun, and they'll look at that team and say, they are working hard enough, right? They aren't suffering, they aren't working extra hours. So you have to have a reliable research-based model through which to interpret your observations, or you may end up trashing a team that's actually really quite wonderful. And unfortunately, I've seen that happen.
Yeah, I've seen that so many times. There's a question from Sylvia McDonald in the audience, or on the live stream. She's asking, a challenge that I've had in information flow is information flow. So for example, leadership insists on Gantt charts and reports and many status updates, meetings, and so on. Any tips for encouraging better ways of reporting and improving information flow?
Who's to go first on this one? I think those types of reportings are very useful for information, right? And what I often see happening with Gantt charts and so forth is that what gets focused on is, well, you missed this particular milestone, or this task is over time, and that leads to blame, or to saying, well, get back on track, rather than looking at what might have been going on, what was learned, what unexpected event happened that brought those things out of, the desired, the dreamed of state. So I think you can have honest one-to-one conversations with managers sometimes. It's often more difficult in a public setting, right? So you can flow the information up in an honest way, one-to-one settings. And sometimes that is the way to start, right? To just talking in a realistic way about what the uncertainties are, and normalizing the fact that there's three kinds. There's preventable error, there's complex error when things factors come together in an unpredictable way and cause something else to happen, and there's error that happens when you take an intelligent risk and it doesn't turn out the way you thought it was going to. So to kind of normalize the fact that problems are a part of life and projects, and the key is how we deal with them.
Yeah. It's interesting because I've seen a couple of times where an idea behind some sort of reporting activity or some statistical gathering has gone kind of way out of control. I think at some level we sort of so far down the path we forgot a little bit of what the origin of the thing was. I worked with a company a while back, and one of the things that they were doing is very laborious timesheet reporting. After a conversation with the CFO, I realized that the only thing that they were trying to do with this data, which was very, very expensive to gather because it was consuming a lot of people's time, was they were basically trying to tell roughly what percentage of the projects that we delivered were things that were investments in infrastructure that we could capitalize, and which things could we not capitalize. And so by knowing this information, and what I'm advocating for is to talk to managers and to talk to the folks upline for you and try to understand what their goals are. Once we knew that was the goal, we said, well, we could look at our vision board and say, okay, well, we did 40 things in the last quarter. 10 of them are capitalizable and the other 30 are not. Does that give you enough information? CFO's answer was yes. And within a couple of weeks, we stopped bothering with the timesheets and saved everybody a huge, huge, huge amount of time, and just as much information as we were getting with it. And so I think there's an opportunity not to aggressively challenge, but kind of seek genuinely through curiosity about what is the goal here? Are you just, are you doing something with this? And what do you do with this data? Because often there's more to it than maybe we realize, just being from the outside.
Something George Dinwiddie talks about in his book on estimation is like estimates serve different purposes for different people at different times. And knowing that what those purposes are will help you provide more useful information, not necessarily precisely accurate information, but useful information. It sounds like that's what happened in that story you told.
Yeah. Cool. There's another interesting question on the chat here. Manuela Bath is asking, what do you see as the difference between a process and heuristic?
Well, a heuristic is a guide to problem solving that is generally applicable. Right? A process is a set of steps you follow. So we all have heuristics that some of them are cross cultures and some of them we learned early, like a stitch in time saved 9. That's kind of a heuristic. It's a guide to something.
An apple a day.
Yeah.
The doctor away.
Yeah.
No, it's not a heuristic.
Well, we all have heuristics, that we use to solve problems in our lives. And they don't tell you the steps you have to follow, right?
Yeah.
So it's a general sort of guide.
Yeah, I'm just thinking, but
I don't like all the rules.
Yeah. I'm just thinking. I'm not sure. So we use quite a lot of patterns, and patterns is like, okay, we have seen something like this work in a certain context, and we have seen something like this work and this work. It's probably similar to a heuristic, maybe not the same, but similar. Who knows?
Yeah.
That seems reasonable.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's probably some technical jargon or this very precise difference between the two and some nuance there, but I've often used those as interchangeable if I'm trying to simplify my language from heuristic to pattern. I think it communicates the same general sentiment in some ways. I think the important thing for me is that there is a level of uncertainty, and in a lot of spaces there isn't a rule that says none of the stuff is linear or deterministic, that when we do this, that thing will always happen. It's somehow, if you do some stuff like this, you plant in the right season, or you compost in the garden, to go back to my earlier metaphor, it's likely that it will have some positive effects. But Esther's, you were saying, if you haven't dealt with the fact that there's rocks and really no rain or super dry soil, other alien invaders that are kind of causing a challenge, maybe suffocating the roots of plants or something. If you haven't dealt with the challenges, you're probably going to have quite a success. But the heuristic is probably still generally somehow true.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. Manuela, hopefully that gives you a little bit an answer to your question. I want to kick over to a question actually from Siegfried Kaltenecker. He's asking, he says, why is it important, as you argue in your book, to use yourself in facilitating change?
So I think that, well, I believe that our ability to connect with people has a big impact on how they're going to respond with us. So I have a number of friends who are clinical social workers, and I've talked to them about this many times, that in study after study, it shows up that you can take two people who have roughly equivalent professional skills, but it does translate to roughly the same outcomes. What seems to make a difference is the ability of people to show up, be present, connect, be empathetic. That really is what determines the difference in the outcomes, right? Given equivalent professional skills, how you're able to connect with a person. And I think that is also true in a situation of change. So on one level, we have to be changing systems, but to change systems, we have to engage other people, right? So our ability to show up, be empathetic, and listen makes a big. For one thing, if we listen to other people and we are empathetic with other people, they are much more likely to return favor. So I think the more we can, take advantage of our curiosity, bring our curiosity to bear, bring our ability to connect, bring our ability to look for the best in a situation, to look for something that's working we can build on. I think that they're all very, very helpful in connecting with the humans while we also are dealing with the complexity, right? And dealing with systems. Yeah. Sorry, I've got a little bit of a throat thing going on here.
It's all good. I wanted to actually do a very short little, I guess, an ad break in a way, and just mention Esther actually has a new workshop that's based on her book. For those of you who haven't yet read the book, personal recommendation from me. I really enjoyed the book. It's inspired a lot of my my thinking about things.
Can you hold it into the camera, Esther?
Okay, can you see it?
7 rules for positive, productive change. It's available, well, they say in the infomercials, it's available in all bookstores or something like this.
Where online books are sold.
There we go. And I'm just linking in the chat. She's actually started offering a workshop that will be open this winter, called Change My Attraction, which is based on the content in the book. And if you enjoyed this conversation or you've read the book, give it a look. Cool. A little bit from, of course, you know that we every week or so. We will, in a couple of weeks, be talking with the authors of the book Team Topologies. So if you have not already signed up on the meetup, maybe you found us via the live stream, you can stay in the loop about Flight Club. I've pasted the link in the chat now. Just go to meetup.com, hit on Flight Club, and of course, if you're enjoying the content, a friendly reminder, please hit the like button on this video, and of course, subscribe so that you can get not only this, but also the other content that we offer. Cool. I think I'm done with the promotional side of things. I want to see, there was another question in the chat that I was looking at. There was actually one that I had here. So, my apologies if I'm a little bit slower than usual. I've spent the entire day running 2 back-to-back workshops, both today and yesterday. So my brain energy is somehow slightly lower. As I was joking at the end of the workshop today, I'm slower than usual. And I got a maybe sort of commiseratory kind of laughs and so on. So Esther, I want to jump back to something that we've talked about a little bit before. Inside your book, you explore this concept, but you talked about it in a couple of different ways. It's this concept of clarity, conditions, and constraints. And these concepts really resonated with me. I'm wondering, what's your kind of latest thinking on this, and how would you explain this concept?
Well, so the clarity and conditions and constraints nest within the levels of the domains of SEAM. But what they have to do, or these are ways to influence patterns of behavior in complex situations, right? So if you have clarity, then people generally know what direction to work in, right? People need the conditions to be able to do their work. So the conditions have to do with creating those, the possibilities, for people to have reasonable teams, reasonable equipment, reasonable, support for their work. And the constraints are saying, there are some things that we're always going to do and some things we are never going to do. We just don't treat people that way here, or we just don't handle our money that way here, or we don't handle our customers that way here. So I find that when you can think about those 3 things on the, in the domain of steering, this is the business we're in. This is how we make money. Those are about clarity. The conditions may be the overall organization of the company. How people are rewarded, how people are paid, things like that. Those are the overall conditions. And the constraints have to do with, these are the boundaries that we don't go outside. We would never treat a customer this way. We would never treat a fellow coworker this way. We would always try to do this. But those exist again on the enabling, enhancing level, with clarity being around what do we work on next? What order are we doing projects in? Who is doing, which team is doing which work? Do the teams work what they need to do the work, and what are the constraints around particularly decision making? Who's to make which kinds of decisions? A project. And then they just at another level of granularity in the making domain, right? That often have to do with how the teams know who's working on what, when are we working on next, how are we, what methods are we using, and what are our working agreements. So it's fractal, just like the SEAM is fractal. You have simple iterations that way.
Nice. Okay. I found it super helpful in sort of an observational sense when working with teams and with different group of folks, is sort of looking at it through the, does this circumstance or pattern of behavior look like, is it a situation where maybe some clarity could be helpful, or is it a conditional thing? Is it more like constraints challenge? And this is really helping to sort of go, okay, maybe what I was doing is I often what I noticed as a result of this was that I often assume that people are lacking clarity. And very often it's actually, no, not the clarity that's missing. It's maybe just the constraints. And so looking at it through this kind of a lens is one kind of practical way that I found this to be helpful in my personal experiences. Yeah,
that's a great example. Cool. So if I see a lot of conflict going on in a team, very often it's because they don't heard about what they're supposed to work, so they spend all the time arguing about that. But it could be that they have no constraints, so they're arguing about how do we go about their work, and it's like, so let's put some constraints around this. You have this much budget, and you can choose between these 5 technologies, and that will get rid of a lot of the argument.
Yeah. And at a slightly meta level, this is one of the things that I love about these kind of models. And it's the same thing with flight levels. It's the same thing with some of Melissa Atkins' work on the coaching stance, and so, is that you can get to look at it and you kind of go, oh, I'm seeing this set of kind of common patterns, but I'm not actually so good seeing these other ones around the side. And it helps you to kind of look at it from a different dimension. So, maybe you, as I gave the example, sort of over-focusing on one aspect, in a flight levels world, people tend to focus only at level 1 or at level 2, level 3, I mean, they tend to miss level 2. And very often in a coaching stance, you over-index on certain types of behaviors, and actually trying something different, as we learned on the PSL, just jiggling, to use the terminology, do something a little bit, just try something unusual that you've never done before, can often give you a completely interesting result, just because it's something different, which is quite cool.
I think it's useful to have a whole bunch of models. Then you're less likely to, lock onto something and say that's the cause for everything. So. If you only, like a friend of mine was talking about a situation where the manager was giving behavioral coaching to teams that were in conflict with the product owner. And so this is how you should be handling conflict, and you should never talk to them this way, you should never do anything. So it's kind of a coaching sort of or behavioral lens on everything. But what was really going on was that the team had a very strong idea about what their goal was, and the product owner had a very different idea about what their goal was, and they were not communicating it. So rather than deal with that disconnect, he was like, this is how you have to behave in conflict. So useful to have a bunch of models.
Yeah.
Cool. So I have one more question that I want to ask you, but before I make that, I just want to stick a link in the chat. For those of you interested to learn more about flight levels, we have an online self-paced course, includes community access and a bunch of stuff. There's a discount code and a link for you to be able to sign up. Check out if you're interested. It's really a nice companion Christmas gift along with Esther's book, or maybe if you're trying to, as you mentioned now, add some more mental models to your bag of tricks. That can be a cool way to consider exploring things. So last question before we close up for the evening. I imagine that a lot of people kind of have this vision in their mind that, if we could just solve all of these things, it would just be magic ponies and it would all be amazing. I'm curious, maybe a little bit of a sort of a thought experiment, or if you see something kind of emerging on the horizon, let's assume that some of the common patterns and the often sort of perpetuating stuff is somehow solved. What would be the new challenge on the horizon? What's the kind of next thing for those of us who may be looking to the future?
Well, Mary Weinberg used to say that the seeds of the next problem are in the current solution. So it's going to be just another set of problems. I don't know if you guys watched Downton Abbey. It was a really big show here in the US a few years ago. And there was the Dowager Duchess who at one point said, life's just a series of problems. You solve one and then next and then next and then the next and then you die. So it's something. I'm not sure what it is, but it'll be something.
I'm enjoying that. I think there's something a little bit kind of almost like at some level you have to accept that Jerry, one of the other things that I remember learning from him was this idea of number 2 always gets promoted. And the metaphor for this is that you have to remember at some level that regardless of what you're dealing with, you solve your biggest problem. The second problem in mind now becomes number 1 problem. And this for me connects a little bit to the same kind of a concept, is that like at some level we have to accept that we're pretty smart people, we're paying attention to what's going on around the world. And so there's going to be things we wish were slightly different. But at some level we have to kind of maybe in a Zen way, just learn to calm down and just accept that perfection, while a worthy thing maybe try to strive for, is not actually there's always something new that we will tackle, new things to solve. Yeah, something.
Problems are a normal part of life.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. And keeps things interesting and exciting. Cool. So I think that is basically what we have time for today. I want to thank you very much for being a guest on the show. It's been wonderful to spend this time, not only now, but also in preparation, chatting and emailing back and forth. Yeah. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you to everyone on the live stream. It's been super cool to have you with us this evening. Thank you for all the great questions. We'll see you again in a couple of weeks. Stay tuned. And for those of you in the US, have a great Thanksgiving. And for the rest of you, have a great week and a weekend. It's been lovely to have you with us. Goodbye from my side.
All right. Goodbye, everyone.
Bye. Bye.
Bye.